Well, people. Right, so QPR, as you're not told, or I'm not aware, QPR have been knocked out of the Carabao Cup yet again for another season. The curse still remains with us, unfortunately, and this time it was at Loftus Road. To be honest, I think it's usually at Loftus Road as well where we get knocked out of the Carabao Cup or everywhere we go. So yeah, but yes, listen, guys. QPR obviously have not exactly been successful in this Carabao Cup for a long time. You know, another year, obviously, being knocked out in the first round, third round, whatever it is. And, you know, starting this, obviously, this whole season off like this, you know, we've been really strong in pre-season, I think, really strong. And Julien did state a couple of weeks ago that, no, last week, I should say, that we would be definitely in for this competition. Strong team. And we did. We put out a strong team. Now, the first half, what I would say, simple as easy, it was very interesting and very good. You know, there was very good signs of what I saw at Fiorentina with the attack, in the sense of the passing was very patient, getting the ball in the attack, making sure it stays in the attack, make sure it stays in a half. Defending was a lot better as well. You know, we didn't get Millwall that many opportunities to get into our final third, which was incredible. It was. The positive signs is this. You know, Julien was there, Kevin Betsy was there, and the one thing that I've been saying for last season was Steve Bold needs to be there at the games, and he obviously wasn't there last season, but he made an appearance this season. He has on the bench at the Carabao Cup, and hopefully we get to see him a lot more on the bench as well. You know, he needs to be there to help the defense, to give them a bollocking, to let them know what they're doing right and wrong. And I felt like that was one of the reasons as well that we played so bad in defense last season. So it was good to see that he was on the bench, but going from there, like I said, you know, we was doing really well in the first half of the attack. You know, we were preventing the stops from Millwall to getting into the final third. We always had this thing last season where certain times where we just end up losing the energy and stop with the high intensity press. Around 35-minute mark this season, it's happened again. So 20 minutes I would usually say last season, 35 minutes this season. So look, the intensity did stop for a little while. I'd say about probably 5-6 minutes the intensity stopped. Millwall was pushing the attack a little bit more. And after that we looked a lot better in the sense of you know, we had an opportunity before half time with a patient attack for the last like 2 minutes, which was really good. You know, we had an opportunity, you know, but we just couldn't finish our chances. At the end of the day, the crossing, the set pieces weren't exactly great in the first half, and there was just certain things that I would say, certain players that weren't amazing. So obviously we'll get into that more at the end of this, about talking about the players. Second half though, I would say we started off pretty okay. We did, not the best. We gave Millwall the opportunity of the game to push up and counter-attack us a lot more. And that's obviously where that first goal pretty much came in from, where the ball came in at a difficult angle from the cross, and obviously Charles has jumped up for it. Not the most comfortablest of saves to get the ball, to hold on to the ball. Obviously, it's at a difficult angle for him. And I did say to everyone pretty much about Shea Charles's height is going to be a problem. You know, he's not the very most tallest guy in the squad, and for a goalkeeper. You know, jumping and sometimes jumping at that distance of the ball, if it's a difficult ball to jump, you're going to have a difficult way of catching it. And that's what happened. And luckily, Millwall had one person in the right place at the right time to knock it in. And, you know, the one thing that I didn't want to see was that, because he was going to get a lot of hate for it on Twitter. Luckily, some people have been fine with it. Some people obviously have said otherwise about Ward and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you know, he played an alright game. His passing was 50-50. There was times where his passing just pretty much was off of the pitch, you know. But I would sit here and say his close range passing has been brilliant. and some long range passing, you know, can be good, but at times just don't think Kone Burrell was even attempting to win the ball in the air. There was times that I just felt they were sluggish. You know, Burrell looked very different on that right wing. When he played against Fiorentina, he was brilliant. Today, he looked like a different player. Not very, like, concentration wasn't there. But the goal for Charles, which obviously was a real problem, and it was a bit like pretty much saying, here you go, Millwall, really. And Millwall have obviously, from there we had to get the other goal, and Mill was defending, you know. And that's one thing that I would say about last season, is they were like Derby with the low block. They were very hard to get past, and it was absolutely brilliant for them to do what they did. And we had chances, we just couldn't finish our chances, like when we stopped them in the first half of the the final third. And they did that for us obviously when we got the ball into the box in the second half. You know, there was a big problem finishing and crossing. We couldn't get any balls onto the right player. And the subs, I felt like, were brilliant in the sense of like bringing them at the right time. There was no scaredness of waiting for Millwall to make a sub, but we looked really good with the subs. You know, subs came on, but were they the right subs to change the game at the level it was at the time? I'm not too sure, but I give him credit for making the subs, Julien, for sure. But we obviously got our goal right at the end there in the set piece. Obviously, we have a new set piece coach, and it was a very lucky goal, like Millwall, where we've headed the ball. Jimmy Dunn's headed the ball from Elisha across, and it's deflected off Sykes and gone in. Now, the keeper should be getting it for sure, but yeah, two goals that were pretty much mistakes and have gone in, which has helped each team. Penalty wise, obviously, you know, it's just gone straight to penalties, and our penalties, I'm just gonna sit and say, were shit. They were really horrendous, really bad. I think that was probably the worst penalty shootout compared to the Carabao Cup game, when obviously Johan Barbe and Lyndon Dykes hoofed the ball off the penalty spot, out of the stadium, for crying out loud. I actually genuinely can't remember what cup game that was. I know it was a Carabao Cup game, but I can't remember who the team against was. But yeah, I haven't seen worse penalties from QPR players like that for a long time. The penalties should have been better. Look, the keeper saved them. Charles was saving a couple, but at the end of the day, those QPR penalties need to be better. They were awful. They were. Chair's penalty at the start was not great. Even Sato's, just all of them really bad. They need to do better with that. They need to work on that on the training ground. The penalties do. There was no effort. You know, you could say it was fixed, but at the end of the day, a lot of players were sluggish and tired after a little while. So yeah, I'm not putting that as a problem. You know, at the end of the day, they've got to be scoring them penalties, whatever happens. So yeah, but QPR knocked out the Carabao Cup on penalties yet again, and yeah, we go from there. Now, going on from player wise, obviously Charles was pretty decent at times, you know, apart from obviously the mistake that he made. Hopefully he can make up for that for sure. You know, it's just his first game of the season, and it's a cup game. Hopefully we see a lot better work on the training ground with all of that stuff. Now, the back four in Amadou, Jimmy, and Ronnie, and obviously Boy Kemper, very impressive in the first half. Boy Kemper as well, you know, very solid defender, very good. It's what we've missed. You know, Davis just wasn't that much solid last season. You know, the attack-wise for Boy Kemper, pretty okay. Wasn't greatest at times, but, you know, the main thing was get him up and down that pitch, and that's what he was doing. Amadou and Benge, same thing as well. There were some touches of his in the second half that weren't great, but, you know, still an absolutely stunning first half for the defence. You know, Jimmy and Ronnie looks like they've got a good partnership going. There's still some work to do to make sure no mistakes happen again like that to help Charles. You know, the passing and the movement and the patience, absolutely incredible from the defence. Now moving on to midfield. Oh, God, if it was a free in midfield, you know, we use the same thing as Fiorentina, where we had Madsen in the middle, Harvey Vale and Chair with him. Now, Chair and Vale, they were having a difficult first half, I think. You know, there was times where Vale was passing the ball okay, but it wasn't all right at times. He was trying to turn. He lost the ball a couple of times. The shooting was appalling, like I said. Even with Chair, same thing as well. Madsen didn't really seem to be really involved in the game today, to be honest. Look, I could sit here and talk shit, but at the end of the day, he seems to be very lost today. You know, he wasn't really focused on being involved. You know, he's still an important player. You know, he did get the ball, help the defense, but on the attack, you know, it was mainly Chair and Vale that were working for that. Now, forward-wise, obviously we have Paul Smith on the left, Kone in the middle, and Burrell on the right. Let me start off with Burrell, because Burrell did look lost again today, 100%. You know, he did well on the right against Fiorentina, but today, you know, at times he looked okay, but the crossing, the pace and the speed, the strength wasn't there today for some reason. It looked a lot different, and I was very shocked to see that. Paul Smith as well looked great in the first half, but the second half the energy levels changed. You know, there was attempts to get into that final third, but even then Paul Smith just just looked sluggish in the second half, the same as Burrell. Kone just I wasn't in the game today completely, wasn't there. You know, every attempt he tried to go for wasn't there. You know, the crossing, and you know, I can't put the blame on Kone all the time. At the end of the day, the deliveries into the box rim were very bad. You know, the jumping's got to be better for the ball when winning the ball in the final third for him, if it's a goal kick or something like that. But the attack today, you know, was more about the defense pushing forward and getting them up there. You know, there wasn't that many great touches and finishes and attacks, but we saw positive things, in my opinion, in defensive side of the attacking wise in the first half. So that's what I would say on match reaction wise. You know, a lot to do in the training ground before Portsmouth away next week. And, you know, I could put out ratings, but I'm just going to put out all of it on the sides here, as you can probably see. But, yeah, we get knocked out of the Carabao Cup, and we go on to Portsmouth next week. And fingers crossed, we get a result at the start of the season, you know. We can focus on the league now. You know, as much as crazy would be great to focus on a cup, but we tried and we failed. It's that simple, you know. Congratulations to Millwall at the end of the day. They've had a great goalkeeper on the penalties they have today, as well as shit penalties from us. So that might have helped them a little bit more. But great support as well from you guys, Millwall fans. Thank you so much in the watch along. But yeah, we'll leave it there for today, and we'll be live tomorrow with our live show, and we'll talk more about it from there. Apart from that, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to. We'll catch you next time. Peace, love, positivity as always. Enjoy your weekend, people. See you in a bit.